Dr. Wiedenfeld here to talk about Hollywood from 1960 to 1980, at which time it's become set in sort of the configuration that it's in now. So there's an interesting transformation that's happening at this time. So I'm going to review the background of where Hollywood is before 1960 and the sort of why there's some problems with the road shows, which is a key way of thinking about big films back then. There's a new wave of new wave film-like hits, and then a return to the blockbuster, which is different from the roadshow, and we'll understand why. So this period, 60 to 80, is also a turbulent period in culture, as there's social movements that are flourishing, women's movement, civil rights, Vietnam War, political changes and movements on every end of the spectrum. Okay. First, let's step back and look at the post-war period and see what was going on then. So there was not an artistic decline per se, but the revenue and the ticket sales started to go down. And so, the United States was dominant internationally, and so was Hollywood, but the studio system, the business was declining in a certain way. And why was that? Well, why the dominance? Cold War empire coming out of World War II. There's anti-communism that's associated with that, as well as, dissent. There's suburbanization is happening, and this is where the decline starts to come in with the rise of television. They combat it through event cinema. Have to go out to the movies to see this special event. It's rather than going multiple times a week as you would do when the cities were the center of the movies and of consumer culture in the 40s. And then you had the studio system shifting because of, remember, the Paramount decision. There was antitrust law. They had to sell off their theaters. And there was also this growth of the package unit, where the agent and, the key stars and directors are, have kind of an independent power now outside of the studio. One example, just back in 56, remember, with the Ten Commandments, this is a good example of the event cinema, the greatest event in motion picture history. El mayor acontecimiento de la historia del cine. It's widescreen, it's color, you don't have that on TV, it's very long, it's big budget, and it's internationally successful. The Roadshow, to say a little bit more about that, these were, it was, physically, it meant a big, expensive print. Rather than a 35 millimeter print, it might be a 70 millimeter print. It's much more expensive. It might have 4-track sound rather than, the standard mono sound. And it's going to play at a big downtown theater. The prices are going to be double. And it's going to play there for as long as it is, holding the public's attention. So the old model was based on theater. If you have a hit play, it's going to keep playing there on Broadway until people stop buying tickets. And then once they stop buying tickets on Broadway, then maybe it'll, move off to the suburbs and to the smaller theaters. So here the Roadshow is the idea of you're going to have this big production, kind of like a Broadway play. It's going to go out on the road and play in all the major markets, and only later will it move off. So it's in the 60s, and this is the most successful film of the decade, Sound of Music. This continues this pattern from the 50s of there's a couple really big pictures that are making extra money at the big theaters and the roadshow style of marketing. Those are the ones that become the most important for the industry. You have less people coming to the medium pictures every day because they're watching more television, but they're still coming out for the big events, and that's the roadshow style of big film. But not every roadshow film is successful. So in the musical genre here, this is a couple of films later with Julie Andrews called Star, and this one is not successful. It's a terrible poster, by the way. It's all this text, and they're trying to sell Julie Andrews on here, but it's even hard to understand what it's even about. But you'll notice down there at the bottom it says now at regular prices. Well, this is a road show. It would normally cost extra to go and see the roadshow print on the bigger screen with the bigger sound, and here it's not successful, so they're selling it at a discount. Now, why didn't some of these work? Well, it's just hard to make great movies all the time. So there's a lot of risk involved with making big movies. If all of your business is going to be around these big movies, it's really going to sting when you get a flop. This one, I guess, had a $15 million budget, which was big at the time. And the other thing here is, see with the road show, we're at the big downtown movie palace style still is the model. And these have to be movies that attract the whole family. The kids are coming, grandma's coming. What about, the young teenage audience? They're a little bit harder to keep track of and a little bit less predictable. But they're the ones who have the free time and the money to go to the movies a lot. So you see I highlight that to see the shift that comes in here. And now we're into the new wavy hits. And the one that I want to focus on here is Bonnie and Clyde. So Bonnie and Clyde only had a $3 million budget versus $15 million for Star. But Bonnie and Clyde made $24 million for Warner Brothers. It probably sold much more than that, but Warner Brothers took back $24 million. So why, so if you're making movies, why would you invest $15 million? That's a big bet when you can make 5 $3 million pictures and just hope, well, maybe one of those will be a big hit. You see, it's a way of, you see the investment strategy behind it here. And so that's the kind of industry background for why you start to get, Hollywood investing in kind of these artsy young pictures. They want to find the youth audience, and Bonnie and Clyde is a great example of that. Okay, so they're made by studios. They're small budgets, but then they're big hits. And the other shift that I want to talk about here before I move on is that Hollywood doesn't own theaters, but the theater owners are shifting from making big downtown movie theaters or drive-ins, and they start to make multiplexes. That becomes the thing by the end of the 60s. And especially into the 70s and 80s, is you're going to have 2 screens, 3 screens, 4 screens. And you see why you do that. If you're going to make 5 movies for $3 million each and hope that one of them hits, well, you can only put one of them on a big single screen. But if you have, a 5-plex, you could put one on each screen. You have different genres, different target audiences. Here's one for, the kid movies, and then another one for the teen movies. Here's one for, the guys and one for the girls. All those marketing concepts, come into the multiplex as well. So this is just another a shift that happens at the time. The multiplex isn't really around when Bonnie and Clyde comes out, so don't get the idea that that's why it was successful. But just the general shift that is happening here. We're moving away from the roadshow downtown picture palace toward multiplex and more target audiences that are different. This is a great poster too, if you haven't been looking at it. They're young, they're in love, and they kill people. Ha! Yeah, definitely not marketing to grandma here. Well, at least a certain kind of grandma. And it has this retro style with the single color. They're laughing, but there's bullet holes in there. I mean, yeah, this looks fun. Retro typeface too. There's another poster here that I found that really plays up the violence, and this is another trend that's happening here. Actually, the ratings. It used to be that everything was general audience only. Made sense with the Picture Palace model, right? Well, now we're moving as we move more and more toward the multiplex. By the end of the '60s, they start to have a rating system. You start to have, the G for general audiences, PG for parental guidance, and then R for restricted. Those are the three categories. Well, and X. Those are the main categories, and a lot of the new wavy movies that are movies for both adult and teen audiences, they're trying to push the limit, have more sex and more violence. This is something you can't get on the TV. So this is part of the event cinema idea. Other kind of small studio hits at the time: The Graduate, 1967, Midnight Cowboy, 1969, which I believe was famously rated X. Originally, a big scandal around that, but because of homosexuality, there's a homosexual element into it at one point. Easy Rider, 1969, MASH, 1970, just a couple examples of the kind of new wave hits. Okay, what makes them new wave-y? Well, behind the scenes, it's a young set of directors who, are coming out of cinephile culture, coming out of film schools, in the same way. Here's some examples from the movie, from Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde, though, that show, the self-consciousness of these movies with regard to photography. Here, these are characters who are posing for the camera. So this movie is trying to be really savvy about what it means to be getting media attention for violence, what that's all about, which is important in around how media reacts to things like riots and protests during the civil rights, to Vietnam War, and that kind of violence on screen. Another thing that you'll see in this film is a lot of there'll be these awkward moments of kind of people will be seen bored, they don't know what to do. There's this sense of malaise. This is very new wave, especially Breathless. We don't have the artificial plot that's driving every moment towards some action. We actually spend some time with these other characters as if they're real people, just feeling the time that they're living in and how it passes. And then, of course, the kind of youth theme of the outlaw youth against authority. A couple stylistic things. There's faster cutting comes back in. So remember, in the post-war era, it was especially marked by the Citizen Kane, Toland and Wells. It's deep focus, it's long take. Here we're going to move back toward more fast cutting, shorter takes, and shallower focus, which is a longer lens that's going to flatten images on the screen. All right, Faye Dunaway there and Warren Beatty, amazing. Faye Dunaway in particular is just great in this film. Okay, so I gave you a couple examples of those hits in the 60s, make a lot of money, like Easy Rider, Graduate. So now the studios think, oh, we need to roll with this And rather than just having small budgets, we're going to have a little medium-sized budgets, and going to make a series of these kind of new wavy auteur films. So they're giving some liberty to directors, filmmakers, to be auteurs, to have a personal vision. And so this is called New Hollywood, or Hollywood Renaissance, or Hollywood New Wave. It's of course not as wild as an independent as it is elsewhere, but fits in with the new waves. Here, this is Robert Altman's Nashville. Altman made a number of really important movies, starting with MASH, but Nashville here is this poster is a great example of his personal style is ensemble movies. He doesn't just have one or two main characters. He has all different kinds of characters who are all moving around this world, and great actors, a lot of improvisation, and especially his sound. He has this kind of omni sound, which is certain kind of realism and feeling in this complex space of people talking over one another. So you can see from the posters here how many different people are on it. Also, the sense of satire. If you look a little bit closer, that this is not some sort of straight patriotic pro country music film. There's a lot of satire going on here. Some other key directors that fit in this new Hollywood, of course, Martin Scorsese, a little bit later in the 70s, Woody Allen, Peter Bogdanovich, Bob Rafelson, Terrence Malick, who's from Texas, Brian De Palma, John Carpenter, Paul Schrader, David Lynch, and so forth. Okay, so that's the studio picking them up. There's also, in the new wavy hit kind of category I have here, there's also independent film that's happening. As Hollywood has been concentrating in the 60s more on the road show, there's, smaller independent firms are making movies to fill the gaps. And, the technology is becoming more accessible for having good independent production as well that can compete, at least in, certain kinds of pictures. So the Night of the Living Dead here, George Romero, another Texas connection. This is a really important early horror film, and some interesting readings of this movie as well, and what it's saying about race and the kind of white corporate types as a sort of zombie is an interesting angle if you watch this film. But in general, the independent production is they're exploiting this kind of exploitation genre we talked about in the post-war era. Target audience of teen horror movies, blaxploitation, martial arts movies. Kind of off Broadway is a little more experimental, theatrical oriented art film, and they're going to continue outside the studios all the way through this period and into the next. And part of that is going to be the growth of film festivals in the U.S., like Telluride and Toronto and Sundance, which is first called the U.S. Film Festival. Those get established in the 1970s, and it becomes a way for the studios. They eventually are going to use these festivals to, well, we'll talk about that later, but use these festivals to identify films that they want to distribute. So rather than studio production of the smaller films, they're just going to be distributors. Okay, so talked a little bit about how, the road show is sputtering, not being so successful. There's this move toward new wave style hits that the studios are taking with, greenlighting smaller and medium budget pictures. But by the end of the 70s, there's going to be a return to the blockbuster. And I'm just kind of joking with this term of blockbusterism. And what brings on that return? Well, it's a bunch of really successful films. There are these blockbusters that make so much money, crazy amounts of money, that they decide to go back into blockbuster style. But it's a little bit different than the Roadshow, which I'll explain why. Okay. Godfather is probably 1972, the biggest, first big blockbuster that stands apart as this new era because it's not just a studio production. It is really seen as an auteur film. Coppola here definitely fancies himself an auteur, and he's part of this younger generation making mega hits here. This is a Paramount picture. And then Coppola will make, he makes The Conversation and, Apocalypse Now, and he will move in to independent when he can. Friedkin's The Exorcist in 1973, a huge hit. And this is an example of how, in this era, we're moving, the big picture, the big blockbuster picture is now in what were formerly considered these kind of small genres, these genres for exploiting, target audiences, horror, gangster movies. Those weren't what you had with the big MGM musicals and the big, kind of biblical epics. These were just kind of considered minor genres. They don't have the kind of moral grandeur of those others. But the new era here, we're going to go after these formerly minor genres are going to become the more important thing. Jaws here, who's all over my face, and is a good example of the saturation marketing techniques that were pioneered by the kind of the independent exploitation firms. And that's instead of the slow release of movies at the downtown theater and then only weeks or months later does it get out there. Now we're going to do wide release. With saturation booking, it's going to be everywhere. There's an opening weekend. It's playing across the country all at once. And there's saturation advertising that goes with it. Advertising on TV and radio and print nationally. It's a huge campaign to get everybody to come out to see these films all at once. And it's about this big opening weekend or big opening weeks. So it's creating a media event around the event picture. This is a little bit different than the Roadshow, which was more of a slow burn. All right. Now, one of the problems that we saw with the Roadshow was that, there's a lot of risk involved. So how do you mitigate that risk? With a big picture? Well, you do it with sequels and having a franchise. Rocky, the smallish budget, is the biggest film in 1976. Jaws was in the summer of 1975. Rocky comes out in Christmas time in 1976, and the idea of investing then in Rocky sequels, this is all of these films. There's Jaws sequels, there's Exorcist sequels, there's Godfather sequels, there's Superman sequels. They filmed the first two Superman at the same time. They planned for it to be a franchise. All these things are familiar to us today. It starts in a serious way here in the 70s. They don't talk about Airport, but I think Airport doesn't really fit in this model, but Airport had the sequels too. I think that's interesting. Star Wars, probably maybe the biggest, after The Godfather, biggest film of the decade, 1977, later in 77. And as I'm sure any fan knows, George Lucas, director here, is famous for the cut of the money that he got for the ancillary revenue from like merchandising and all of these non-film things. Well, Hollywood, definitely notices how much money he's making, and that also becomes a part of the new blockbuster strategy. It's a media event, and the film is in a way just a marketing concept for how are we going to market all these kinds of merchandise and spin off other media. There's one concept at the middle, and we're trying to just sell people all things around this intellectual content, this intellectual property. We're creating an intellectual property, a high concept, and then we're selling it in all these ways. Okay, so that is the new blockbuster that we get to by 1980, and the funding for those the medium, the more auteur style pictures dries up, and the focus starts to come back to special effects and technique. Spielberg and Lucas are interesting. Spielberg directed Jaws, of course, and Lucas. They were kind of early on in their careers more of the auteur kind of movie brat style, and then they focus on the blockbuster production and the business side, so that the personal vision is less foregrounded, and that is they become kind of the big filmmakers all the way through to the 2020s, or their franchises anyhow, and we'll talk more about that on another day.